Alright, so this is a complete video about everything you could ever need to know and more about automation management and controlled flight into terrain, or CFIT, which are the two last concepts of SRM, or single pilot resource management. We are of course talking about human factors inside aviation. Hi, my name is Jorge Muñoz. I'm a senior instructor pilot working in El Salvador, and as always, you will find the timestamps linked in the description below this video and also in a pinned comment down below in case you want to check out something in particular. Okay, so this first part of the video, we are going to dive deep into the main concept of automation management and how it is entirely on us if the automation equipment inside the airplane helps us greatly or screws us greatly. If this video seems just too long for you, then you can find the more bite-sized versions of this video right here on your screen right now, or also linked in the description below. So when we are talking about automation management, basically we are talking about autopilot and using our equipment inside the cockpit to help us not having to do everything by ourselves inside the cockpit and that kind of stuff. Automation management will decrease a lot of possible dangers inside the flight, but only if we know how to use our equipment in a proper way. If we don't and try to use it anyways, it can decrease the safety of our flight in a great way. This is because when we talk about the equipment that we're going to use on this automation management, we are going far beyond our 6 basic flight instruments and parameters, you know, the airspeed, heading, altitude, attitude, and vertical speed indicator and turn coordinator, or our oil pressure and temperature parameters. When we talk about the real concept of automation management, we are typically not talking just about a simple autopilot, one that can maintain our heading and or current altitude. At this point, we are talking about airplanes that have an advanced avionics system, i.e. fully digital displays like a PFD or a primary flight display or an MFD, a multifunction display. All this plus, of course, integrated a lot with an autopilot that follows these displays. Now, how does this automation system and all these fancy displays helps us exactly? Well, to be honest, as I said before, when using this fancy equipment in the right way, that's like the big caveat here, that we have to know very well how to use this equipment in order to be effective and actually help us. With that being said, it can basically help us out with all the other 5 concepts that we have talked about this far. It pretty much helps us with everything. For example, if we talk about work overload, this can be awesome because it can reduce our amount of work like by a ton, like really a lot, just by not having to worry about keeping our heading and altitude straight, where to start our climb or our descent, and when to turn right or left. And we can even go as far as practically programming our whole flight inside our avionics system and just continue monitoring that everything runs as planned, giving us much more time to prepare ourselves for the more critical phases of the flight, to have our charts ready, our checklists and such. You know, all these moments that usually tend to become heavy workload periods now seems very less complicated. At this point, our main problem will only be to keep the communication, since we still need to continue talking to the ATC. Or if we talk about situational awareness, in this case, our situational awareness will increase in spades, since our multifunction display will be doing all the heavy lifting for us. Remember that a few videos ago I kept talking about how we should be building this 3D mental scheme or mental map of the flight, of where we are heading to or where we are coming from, what's the condition of the airplane and such. Well, it is still good to have all that inside our minds, but now we literally have a digital map in front of us. with everything that is happening, everything that is surrounding us, and maybe even more information than what we could have ever had inside our minds, inside our own mental scheme. The map is literally showing us that, hey, you have a mountain here and another traffic over there. Don't forget about the storm that it's starting to form right behind you. Don't forget to change the fuel tanks, and also don't forget about the dinner that you have planned with your mom right before the flight. Yeah, that too. And it's all similar stuff if we start talking about aeronautical decision making, risk management, and controlled flight into terrain. In the end, all these 6 concepts are kinda related one another. When automation management can become really dangerous, it's, as I said before, when we don't know very well what the hell we are doing with our equipment. And we are just like toying around a bit with it, seeing what we can get out of it, seeing what it can't and can do. Like, for real, I cannot overstate how important it is for us that we master the use of this advanced equipment before diving deep into them and try to use them for everything we can. Personally, I think that it is pretty straightforward to learn to use your 6 basic flight instruments, but it can be a whole different story when trying to learn how to use your primary your primary flight display and multifunction display. Learning all the things and tricks that you can do with them, how to program them, how to change from one display to another, and how to even read them properly. I think it is safe to compare the first time trying to learn what all these different displays can do and what we can do with them to what we would feel if we were to change from using an iPhone for our whole life to using a phone with an Android system for the first time ever. Like, we have only kinda have seen what our friends do with their Android phones, but we have never actually even touched one before. There is like this very steep learning curve at the very beginning that we need to learn if we want to get something out of the phone. I think that I could have come with a better analogy for that, but I think you get the point. What's having to learn how all these fancy displays work can cause on us the exact opposite of what we want, i.e. a considerable amount of increased workload, because we are trying to kind of figure out like how the heck to program this thing that we have in front of us, at the same time that we are doing all the normal chores that we have to do during a normal flight. So overall, we are just increasing the number of things that we have to do, that we have to figure out at the moment, and we are getting distracted by this thing that we don't know how to use. We are also decreasing our situational awareness for these same reasons. We might be misunderstanding what the screen is showing us, or maybe we are just not sure about what we are seeing on those screens, and we are still forcing us to use them for some reason, and the amount of time that we spent trying to have these digital displays and screens working in front of us only made us screw the mental map that we had already well established inside our heads, the mental scheme of the whole flight. So, long story short, if you know how to use your PFD and MFD and similar equipment that you might have inside your airplane, then great! Go for it, use it, it will help you a lot. If you don't know how to use it, then better try to leave it alone. Use what you know how to use, learn how to use the equipment that you don't, and then come back. After all, I assure you that it is a whole lot easier and faster to learn and understand what you don't know well about your digital equipment when you are on the ground than when you are trying to maintain a safe flight. Now we are going to move forward with the second part of the video, but before we do that, let me tell you that if you want to become an outstanding private pilot, if you are curious and you want to prepare yourself in the best possible way for all the tests to come, or even if you are an advanced private pilot that wants to remember and perfect the basis and the knowledge from the BFR world, or if you want to start your private pilot training with a heads up over the others, then I highly recommend you should check out my book Essential Knowledge for Private Pilot. You will find the link of the book in the description below this video. It is an Amazon Kindle exclusive. This book uses the two most effective study techniques in the whole world, which are active recall and spaced repetition, and it applies them into aviation. If that sounds good to you, then please go check out the book in the description below. It is available in English as well as in Spanish. Remember, you shouldn't be studying hard, you should be studying effectively, and with this book you can do just that. With this book, among many other things, you will nail everything you need to know about your basic flight instruments, which you will have to understand to perfection before ever starting out with all this automation management deal. So that's a good place to start. And that's it. So continuing with the video, now we're going to learn about which considerations we need to have when using all this automation management stuff, since we can let ourselves fall into three possible risks when using our own automation equipment wrong. So let's see what those risks are. Now, having the option to use all this automation equipment, it's not bad. Knowing how to use it, it's not bad. And using it, it's certainly not bad. So, what's the problem or problems that we can have when using this fancy way of flying? Well, actually, there are three possible problems. I don't really want to use the word problems for this because they really aren't. They are more like possible risks. And these possible risks are 1. Complacency, 2. Dependency, and 3. Forcing the issue. Or better said, not knowing well enough how to use your own automation equipment. Let's talk a bit about the first one, which is complacency. And do you remember that this term was also involved into all that stress spectrum, lack of stress, and optimum amount of stress to optimize our way of doing our jobs or duties in general? And the link of that video will also be right here on your screen right now and in the description below if for some reason you haven't seen that one yet. Well, so then why is complacency also involved into this? Well, as I said before, all these 6 concepts that we have been talking about for ages at this point are actually interconnected with one another. They all complement each other very well. So, in this case, automation management done in the wrong way can cause us to fall into complacency, which means that we will inevitably decrease our situational awareness. But it's actually not the equipment's fault, it's our own, as in most cases when we are inside this topic, since after all we are talking about human factors. Complacency will start to come on us when we start seeing this automation thing as something that it's just to set it and forget it, which is clearly not. Automation was not designed for us to once is set, fall asleep inside the cockpit. It was designed to release pressure and work overload from us. You know, to relieve all those factors that we talked about in that stress video that comes into play at the moment of flying. We can't let the airplane do whatever while we are checking our phones and joking with each other inside the cockpit. We should always keep monitoring everything. Things like if the displays are showing us the stuff that we expect to see from them on a normal flight. If the flight is going accordingly to the charts that we are using. Where are we at this moment in this chart? If the flight plan is being executed the way it should. You know, all those things that you usually do. Yes, right now you are not necessarily doing them by yourself. Now the automation system is taking care of it, but you are still in charge of what the automation system is doing. You are the boss. The automation system is designed to take us out from that spectrum of extreme stress and put us on that sweet spot that we talked about. We cannot let it take us to the other extreme, where complacency will be found. On either of these two extremes, we will lose situational awareness. We will lose our mental scheme of the flight. A controlled flight into terrain suddenly is much more likely to happen. All the problems that we have pinpointed before. See this thing of complacency like that thing from Tesla that makes the car drive by itself. Kind of drive by itself. You put on the destination that you desire, you let go of the wheel, and the car starts moving by its own, forward by its own. It knows when there is traffic behind or traffic to the left, traffic to the right, forward, and all that stuff. It can accelerate and decrease its own speed, but the car is often checking on you if you are not too distracted. It tells you to touch the steering wheel, and if you don't after a while, then the car literally sounds an alarm to grab your attention back, or to wake you up if you were asleep. And ultimately, if you still didn't respond and didn't take the wheel, the car will slowly stop. Well, I think it's a pretty similar concept. The way we should fly our airplane when using the automation system to the way this Tesla should be driven. The system is designed to just take a part of the work of us and not to do it all by its own. And on top of that, where it can be very different is that if we are not doing our job, the airplane cannot stop by itself like the car can, since, well, we are in the air. So we can all assume what it's likely to happen if we don't give the airplane and the whole flight the attention it deserves. So that's all I have to say about complacency. The second possible risk is dependency. This one is pretty straightforward. As we get more and more used to fly in a certain way, with the automation system, we start seeing the old way of flying manually more like a distant memory. To put it in 3 words, we lose practice. We lose practice on how to fly the airplane manually. And since we are pilots, that's something that just can't happen to us. We can't feel uncomfortable by flying ourselves instead of letting the automation system do everything by its own. That has been the cause of many accidents, even more on the side of airline pilots, since most of the time they are just using the computer and the computer is the one actually flying the airplane. You know, to put it in simple terms, if the equipment that we are using for some reason fails, if for some reason we just can't keep using the automation system, and we have to take control of the flight by ourselves, we have to be sure that we can comply with our duties anyway. We need to be sure that the automation system is not taking away from us our flight skills and experience of the airplane. And how do we prevent that from happening? Well, that just can be done by performing manually our own flights every now and then. Keep a healthy mix of how you fly. Fill yourself out. And the third and final possible risks when using our automation system is that we might be just forcing the issue. We are forcing ourselves to use this strange equipment that we are not very good at. That seems confusing to us, that it's just complicating everything. So why keep using it when there is actually no need for it? The only thing that our own fancy automation equipment is doing for us in this instance is to increase our workload, and therefore, you guessed it, it's decreasing our situational awareness. It can overwhelm us, because on top of doing all the tasks that we have to do, all the chores that we still need to do during the flight, since we are not using the automation system properly, we put on ourselves another extra chore of trying to figure out this complex equipment in front of us. If we don't know how to use this equipment, then we should continue the flight without it. Just throw it out of the window. or chuck it into the back. That's probably more economic. We should continue flying the way we know. That's the safest way to fly in this scenario. Learn how to use the equipment after the flight when you are safe and sound in the ground, or in a simulator, where we can pause, go slower, and try again without any unnecessary risks. Now that we have finished talking about automation management, we will dive deep into the concept of controlled flight into terrain. I included this concept along the automation management since this one was the only concept that we completely broke down in just one video. And I didn't want to leave alone that video, and automation management isn't that long on its own. In this portion of the video, we're going to talk about what the main concept of controlled flight into terrain actually means, why this happens, and why this can happen to any of us. What can lead us to a controlled flight into terrain, as well as how we can prevent it. Now, let's start with controlled flight into terrain. As one of the concepts inside single pilot resource management, controlled flight into terrain basically is what happens when we are very certain of what we're doing. We are sure that what we are doing is right. We are doing it good. Everything is going just as planned. Our altitude is constant. Also our heading. All the parameters seemed to be good enough. The entire flight is in order, or so we thought. Because even though all these things seemed to be going just as planned, even though we have everything under our control, we still ended up heads first into an accident. So no one ever noticed that we were going to have an accident. But you would think that when an accident is about to happen, everyone inside the airplane is to an extent ready for it. The passengers were given instructions by the flight crew of what to do. There is this tense air inside everyone's mind, since, well, their life it's on the line. But in this context of controlled flight into terrain, everyone was living their normal life, having a fun, chill time, without any concerns whatsoever up until the very moment, the very second the airplane crashed. In other words, we led the airplane and everyone inside, including us, to a crash either with terrain or water, i.e. mountains, trees, the ocean, whatever. We had a controlled flight up until the very end. But why was it controlled and yet we still ended up on a crash? Because we had no prior awareness of what was actually happening. We had no idea of the real situation of our flight. To put it in 3 words, we were wrong. We were wrong about what we were doing all along. Our 3D mental map of the situation was just mistaken. We got lost on our own mental scheme of the flight. That's what happened. Okay, it seems like I ran out of things to say to describe the same concept. By the way, if you want to dive deep into building this 3D mental scheme or mental map of your flight, then click the video right here on your screen right now, or also the one linked in the description below this video. But I'm sure that by now you understand the concept of controlled flight into terrain. So, how do we solve it? Well, for airliners or big companies inside the aviation industry, it's fairly easy to reduce the controlled flight into terrain by doing intensive, well-structured, professional training programs for all their pilots and flight crews, like for pretty much everyone in general, as well as by implementing a lot of expensive equipment that will help the pilots throughout the whole flight. So they seemed to be sorted out. Sadly, reality is not as nice for us inside the general aviation world, because we, for the most part, don't have access to the same professional training nor cutting-edge equipment. We are just mere mortals. So we have to work with the cards we are dealt. And since I don't think that there is any pilot nor someone similar watching this video, that's assuming at all that someone is still watching my video, let's talk a bit about which factors can cause us to have a controlled flight into terrain. First, we have weather. As you would assume, it is incredibly easier to crash an airplane against the terrain or water when we are flying under IMC or instrument meteorological conditions, i.e. poor weather conditions like clouds, storms and such, than flying into VMC, that is visual meteorological conditions, i.e. a good weather, a sunny day with unlimited or at least fairly okay visibility. Second, we have something like unfamiliar environment. Of course, it is easy to know where you are, or at least to have an idea when you are somewhere you are used to fly. You know that there is a mountain over there and also some tall buildings near the airport. Your 3D mental map of that zone is pretty well designed. But what if you are going somewhere outside of your domains? You can't lose your positional awareness at any moment during the flight. Or at least you shouldn't. You can't get lost nor get confused about where are you coming from or where are you going to. Where are you at right now and where are you going next? So as you can see here, it also comes down to play the situational awareness factor, the last concept we talked about last time. Check that video out if for some reason you haven't already. Another thing that can lead us to have a controlled flight into terrain, it's having to do non-standard procedures or the out of the normal situations. Look, it's fine if we get used to what we typically do during our flights. We can get used to practice certain maneuvers or to get used to do a certain amount of IFR procedures or emergency situations. But can you still stay comfortable and composed if you have to do something out of the normal for you? Something that you don't practice every day? Can you still maintain your 3D mental map of what you're doing, or are you going to get completely lost? Now, something that also could affect us is the loss of communication. This one isn't even anybody's fault, but you have to know what to do if it happens. What's your plan? Which altitude are you going to go next? How are you going to let everyone else know that you have lost comms? If you were being guided by control tower and suddenly you lost all communications, how can you stay on a safe distance from other traffic or from terrain elevations that you cannot see, either because you are flying during night or you are flying under instrumental meteorological conditions? Look, nobody can say that a controlled flight into terrain it's impossible to occur. Not even airliners. Not even with all their fancy training and equipment. But here are some things that we as pilots from the general aviation world can do. The first and most important thing that we can do to try to avoid a controlled flight into terrain is to do a good flight plan. As I said before, it's good and it's easy to have a good 3D mental map of the training zones that you usually fly over. But if you're traveling places outside of your knowledge box, give yourself the necessary time to make a solid flight plan. To know the obstacles, the terrain that you're going to be flying over, the distances that you're going to cover. Really, I cannot overstate the importance of making a good flight plan, even if it is somewhere that you already know, let alone somewhere where you haven't been before. It's always easier to fly somewhere new if your mind has already been there 5 minutes ago. I can guarantee you that this simple advice will help you to avoid the vast majority of possible controlled flight into terrain situations we have talked about. Also, the other thing that you can do is to use the current charts and procedures. Remember, the obstacles are always changing. New buildings are being built, new antennas, new cables. Not new mountains though. But that's one of the main reasons why charts are constantly being renewed. Because new things are always being built, and if you don't expect them to be where they are, then you can experience a not so happy ending. The good news here is that if you use electronic charts and you have a subscription, your charts will always be up to date. But yeah, Keep this advice in the back of your mind. Of course, just as with the rest of these human factors concepts, you will need to constantly practice them in order to get better at them. And if you do have terrain and navigation displays, be sure to use them. Check them out constantly, especially if you're having second thoughts about where you are. So my last advice would be, know how to use the equipment inside your airplane and how to use your airplane in general. If you found this video interesting, then you should go check out this video over here. It is the complete concept about ADM, aeronautical decision making, or maybe this video over here. This one is the main concept about risk management. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, comment and all that stuff, and I hope to see you in another video. Bye bye.